I was the only one in the unit who could write. So I wrote letters home for everyone, but I never told the truth. Thomas was 23 when he arrived at the front. He wasn't there for courage or duty. Conscription was mandatory, and he didn't have the money for a bribe. In his backpack, he carried 3 worn books, a hardcover notebook, and 6 sharpened pencils. The other soldiers carried photos of their sweethearts and medallions of saints. The trench he called home for the next 18 months smelled of mud, urine, and fear. There were 17 men in total. Most couldn't read. Some could barely sign their own names. It was Sergeant Miller who asked them first. "You write pretty, kid." My mother likes pretty words, so Thomas wrote the first letter on a cold November afternoon. He described a clear sky, hot food, and the strong camaraderie among the men. He didn't mention the constant rain, the rotten rations, or the body of an enemy soldier decaying just 50 meters away, unreachable. When he read the letter aloud, Miller smiled. "My mother will like this." After Miller, the others came. James with a pregnant wife back home. Carl, writing to his 3 younger sisters. Eddie, who had a fiancée waiting in Ohio. Thomas wrote every week, sometimes 2 or 3 letters a day. He invented details. He described meals that never existed: Sunday roasts, fresh bread, strong coffee. He created stories of quiet heroism, turning the unbearable boredom and terror into a controlled adventure. No one questioned it. They simply trusted him. The first death happened in January. It was Eddie. He stepped on a mine hidden in the mud. He didn't die immediately. It took 4 hours of screaming in the dark, calling for his mother, begging for it to end. No one could help him. When silence finally fell, the task of writing the letter fell to Thomas. He stared at the blank paper for an hour. How do you tell a fiancée that the love of her life died alone, in the mud, crying in agony? He didn't. He wrote that Eddie had died saving 2 comrades from a surprise attack. That it was quick, that he was brave, that he didn't suffer. That his last words were her name. He handed the sealed envelope to the communications officer. He never knew if she believed it. But he knew she would live a better life with that lie than she ever could with the truth. After Eddie, there were others. James died of dysentery, delirious with fever. Thomas wrote that it was a sudden infection, that the doctors did their best, and that James spoke of his wife and baby until his last breath. Carl was hit by shrapnel while sleeping. He woke up missing a leg and died of shock 20 minutes later. Thomas wrote about a heroic charge, how Carl protected his friends, and how he died in peace, knowing he'd done the right thing. With each letter, the lie became more perfect. Thomas learned what families needed to hear. Mothers wanted to know their sons didn't suffer. Wives wanted to know they were remembered. Sisters wanted to know their brother had been brave. And Thomas gave them that. Every week, he transformed horror into dignity. He never told the other soldiers what he was doing. They thought he just wrote down what they dictated. They didn't know he rewrote everything later, alone, by candlelight, keeping a separate notebook with the true brutal versions. Maybe it was so he wouldn't forget. Or maybe just to be sure the truth still existed somewhere, even if no one else knew it. Sergeant Miller died in April, not in combat. One morning he just gave up. He woke up, looked at the gray sky, and said, "I can't take it anymore." 3 days later, he put his rifle under his chin. Thomas was 5 meters away. He saw everything. Writing to Miller's mother was different. How do you invent heroism and suicide? How do you turn surrender into sacrifice? He tried for 3 days, but every version sounded false, cruel. Then he realized he didn't need to invent a different death. He just needed to invent a different Miller. So he wrote about a courageous man who faced his fear every single day. About a son who thought of his mother every night. He wrote about a soldier who died protecting his men in a surprise attack, too fast to feel any pain, thinking of home until the very end. It was the most beautiful letter he had ever written. When he finished, he cried for the first time since arriving at the front, not for Miller, for himself. Because he knew he was becoming someone who lied so well, he was starting to believe his own stories. The war ended. Thomas returned home with his notebook of truths hidden in his backpack. He tried to live a normal life. He got married, had 2 children, and worked in a printing shop for 30 years. He never spoke about the war. He thought he had buried it all. Until one October afternoon when she appeared at his door. She was in her 70s, with white hair and Eddie's eyes. Thomas recognized her immediately. "I'm Margaret," she said, her voice soft. "Eddie's fiancée. I'm sorry to bother you. Eddie talked about you in his letters. He said you were a good man, someone who knew how to put feelings into words." She opened her purse and took out a yellowed envelope. "This is the last one. The one you wrote." Thomas felt his world start to spin. "I've read this letter 1,000 times," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "On the bad days, when I thought I couldn't go on, I'd read it again. And it helped. Knowing he died being brave. Knowing he thought of me. Knowing he didn't suffer." She looked at him with such genuine gratitude. "I just wanted to thank you for giving me this gift." Thomas stood there, silent. He wanted to tell her the truth, that Eddie died alone, screaming in the mud. That it was all a lie. But he looked at her face, at the tears of gratitude in her eyes, and he realized some truths don't set you free. Some truths only destroy. "I remember Eddie," Thomas said finally, his voice thick. "He was a good man." Margaret smiled. "He was. And thanks to you, I was able to remember him that way all these years." She hugged him before she left. He watched her walk away, carrying a lie that had become more true than any fact. That night, Thomas went down to his basement, opened the old trunk, took out the notebook filled with the horrible truths, and burned it all. He finally understood. He hadn't written lies. He had written the versions of these men that they deserved to be remembered as. He gave dignity where there was none, and hope where there was only despair. He had built memories that allowed people like Margaret to keep living. And maybe, just maybe, that was a greater truth than any accurate description of how a man really died. Thomas passed away at 86 peacefully in his own bed. His children found a metal box filled with dozens of old, unsent letters. They didn't understand what they were, but they kept them. Because there was something in those words, something in the elegant script, that felt important. As if someone, a long, long time ago, had tried to save the world with small, gentle lies. And in his own way, perhaps he had. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it. It helps more than you know. We'll see you in the next one.